At my father's funeral, my uncle whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. He left nothing, not even a son worth his name. My cousins laughed, my mother's eyes filled with shame. I said nothing, just stood there quiet. Weeks later, when the inheritance papers arrived with my name on every page, their laughter died. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Ethan sat on the worn wooden steps of his porch, staring out at the fading glow of sunset as though the horizon might hold an answer he could not yet name. The air carried the faint scent of pine and dust, familiar and heavy with memory. Behind him, the house was alive with muted sounds, Claire moving about the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the hum of a quiet radio. On the surface, it seemed like an ordinary evening, yet beneath the stillness, there was tension, an invisible thread that tugged at Ethan's chest, pulling him towards shadows he had tried to ignore for years. Claire, always steady, came to the doorway with her hair tied back, wiping her hands on a towel. "Dinner's ready," she said softly, as though her voice might not reach him if she spoke too loudly. He gave her a small smile, the kind that tried to reassure without promising anything. She had grown used to that smile, though she hated it. It was his shield, his way of keeping her at a distance, even as she tried to pull him closer. The evening passed in quiet ritual, food on the table, the faint sound of rain beginning against the roof, a few scattered words between them that never cut deep enough to draw blood. Ethan chewed mechanically, his eyes fixed on the framed photograph that hung above the table. His father, Richard, in a pressed suit, the kind of smile that belonged to a man confident of his place in the world. Claire noticed the way Ethan's gaze lingered there, but she said nothing. Some silences were safer than words. Later, when Claire had gone to bed, Ethan found himself in the old study. He hadn't meant to go in. His feet had carried him there, almost against his will. The air was thick with the scent of old books and dust, the kind of stillness that made every creak of the floorboards feel like a betrayal. He stood before Richard's desk, tracing the edge with his fingertips, remembering the weight of his father's presence that once filled this room. Something on the desk caught his eye, a small envelope, yellowed with age, half hidden beneath a stack of old bills. He pulled it free, the paper brittle against his skin. His name was written across the front in Richard's sharp handwriting. His chest tightened as he opened it, expecting a simple note, perhaps a forgotten reminder. Instead, he found a single sheet of paper filled with words that made the room tilt beneath him. It was not a letter of love or memory. It was a warning, cryptic and urgent. "If you read this, it means the truth has already begun to surface. Trust no one, not even those closest to you. What I did, I did to protect you. Do not let them twist the story. Do not dig deeper." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The words burned, each line sinking into him like ice. Trust no one. Protect you. Do not dig deeper. His father, a man who had demanded honesty above all things, now left him a riddle that threatened to unravel everything. He folded the paper carefully, slipping it back into the envelope with trembling hands. The house felt different now, darker, sharper, every shadow holding weight. He turned at the sound of the front door opening, his heart slamming against his ribs. Daniel stepped inside, water dripping from his jacket, eyes hard as stone. Childhood friend, brother in everything but blood. And yet their bond had grown brittle, strained by years of unspoken resentment. "You're up late," Daniel said, his voice edged with something Ethan could not quite name. Ethan forced a casual shrug. Couldn't sleep." Daniel's gaze flicked to the envelope in Ethan's hand before he looked away. "Be careful," he muttered. "Some things are better left buried." Without waiting for an answer, he disappeared down the hall, leaving the echo of his words to linger like smoke. Ethan stood frozen, the envelope burning in his palm. How much did Daniel know? How much had Richard hidden? That night, he dreamed of his father's voice calling from a place he could not reach. He woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, staring into the dark as though it might reveal an answer. The letter lay on the nightstand beside him, a silent reminder that the world he thought he knew was already cracking. And Ethan knew, with a clarity that terrified him, that the quiet life he had clung to was over. Whatever secrets Richard had buried were clawing their way to the surface, and Ethan would have no choice but to follow, no matter where they led. The morning light crept across the floorboards, washing the house in a pale glow that felt far too gentle compared to the storm brewing inside Ethan. He hadn't slept, not truly. The letter from Richard still pressed against his thoughts, every line echoing like a whisper in his skull. He carried it folded in his pocket, unable to let it go, yet too afraid to read it again. Claire noticed immediately. She always did. She placed a plate in front of him, eggs cooling on porcelain, and studied him with quiet intensity. "You've got that look again," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Ethan tried to smile, but his lips barely curved. "What look?" "The one that means you're hiding something from me." Her voice was gentle but steady, the same tone she had used since they were children, when she was the one who patched his wounds and covered his mistakes. "You've been restless, Ethan. What's going on?" He shifted, staring at the food he had no appetite for. For a moment, he almost told her everything. And everything. The envelope, the cryptic warning, the weight pressing down on him, but the words twisted in his throat. Trust no one. Richard's handwriting burned behind his eyes. Instead, Ethan forced out, "It's nothing, just work, just thinking." Claire tilted her head, unconvinced, but she didn't push. "You're carrying too much," she whispered. "I can see it." Before he could answer, a sharp knock rattled the door. Ethan rose, tension stiffening his shoulders, and opened it to find Daniel standing there, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Daniel said. He didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside as though the house still belonged to him too. Claire frowned but said nothing, retreating to the kitchen with wary eyes. Ethan shut the door slowly. "About what?" Daniel turned, his eyes like steel. "About you sneaking around last night. About what you're digging into." The blood drained from Ethan's face. "You were watching me?" "I had to," Daniel snapped. "You're stirring up ghosts that should have stayed buried. Don't think I don't see it. You've been chasing shadows, Ethan, and I need to know why." Ethan's chest tightened. The temptation to show him the letter, to share the weight, was strong. But again, Richard's warning pulsed in his memory. Trust no one. He met Daniel's gaze and forced his voice to stay calm. "You're imagining things. There's nothing." Daniel stepped closer, the air thick with tension. "Don't lie to me. If you keep digging, you'll drag everyone down with you." His tone was not a threat but a plea, yet beneath it was anger, deep and simmering. "You've always had this need to know more, to tear things open even when you can't fix them. You think that makes you strong? It makes you dangerous." Ethan clenched his fists, swallowing back the retort burning on his tongue. He had no words to bridge the growing canyon between them. Daniel finally exhaled, shaking his head. "I'm warning you, stop before it's too late." With that, he turned and left, the door closing with a hollow thud that reverberated through the house. Ethan stood in the silence, the warning echoing like a curse. His friend was slipping away, and trust, once so simple, had become a fragile, vanishing thing. Later that afternoon, he found himself on the porch again, staring at the cracked boards under his boots. That was when Sarah appeared. She crossed the yard with a measured grace, her coat buttoned tight, her smile kind but touched with worry. She had been part of his life since childhood, the neighbor who carried warmth into their home when Richard's stern presence left it cold. "You look troubled," she said, her voice soft as she settled beside him. Ethan forced another smile, but Sarah's eyes were sharp, too perceptive. "You're chasing something, aren't you? I can feel it." "I'm just trying to understand," Ethan admitted, his voice low. Sarah's smile faltered, replaced with something heavier. "Be careful, Ethan. Some truths don't bring peace. They only destroy." The words stung, echoing Richard's letter in a way that made his chest ache. He searched her face, trying to decide if she knew more than she was saying. She held his gaze for a long moment, then reached out, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "Please, don't let curiosity lead you into darkness." That night, Ethan sat in his room with the envelope before him, the weight of every warning pressing down. His father's letter, Daniel's fury, Sarah's gentle caution, all pointed in the same direction. Stop searching. But the ache in his chest told him he couldn't. The silence in the house was louder than any warning, and the photograph of Richard hanging in the hallway seemed to watch him with a knowing smile. Ethan leaned back, his hands trembling as he closed his eyes. He could already feel the ground shifting beneath him, the fragile bonds of trust fraying one by one. And yet, despite every warning, he knew the path was set. He would keep walking deeper into the dark, because to stop now would mean surrendering to the lies forever. The night pressed close around him, thick and heavy, and in the quiet he heard his own whisper, "I have to know." The nightmare began with a voice. Ethan stood in a field of shadows, unable to see the ground beneath his feet, and yet he could hear it clearly, Richard's voice, calling him by name. The words were muffled, broken as though carried on the wind, but the warning was sharp enough to slice through the fog of sleep. Don't trust them. Don't open the door. He woke with a violent start, breath ragged, his body drenched in sweat. The room was silent, but his father's voice clung to him like smoke. He pressed his palms over his face, trying to steady himself, but the dream refused to fade. It was more than memory, it was a message clawing its way into the present. Restless, he left his bed and wandered through the hushed corridors of the house. The old study waited, locked tight, a relic of Richard's presence. For years, Ethan had respected that locked door, had treated it like sacred ground. But tonight the key burned in his pocket, and the pull was unbearable. The door creaked as he turned the lock, the sound echoing through the silent house like a confession. The study smelled of leather and dust, and the shadows seemed heavier here, as though the room itself carried secrets too heavy for light. Ethan's eyes moved over the shelves, the stacks of ledgers, the forgotten keepsakes. Then he saw it, a false bottom in the drawer of Richard's desk, slightly ajar. His pulse quickened. He pulled it open, and inside lay a folder thick with notes, newspaper clippings, and letters. Among them was a photograph, yellowed at the edges. Ethan froze. The image showed his father standing beside a man he didn't recognize at first, until his eyes landed on the background. There in the corner was Melissa as a child, clutching her mother's hand. The breath caught in his chest. Why would Melissa's family appear in Richard's hidden files? His father's arm rested on the stranger's shoulder with familiarity, yet the smile on Richard's face looked hollow, strained. Ethan turned the photo over, finding a date scrawled in his father's unmistakable handwriting. It was the year before Melissa's family had vanished from their neighborhood, their lives torn apart by circumstances no one ever explained. The room tilted. Ethan shuffled through the notes, his eyes racing across coded messages and fragmented phrases. Debt unpaid. She can never know. Keep them separated. The truth pressed against him, suffocating, and yet he couldn't stop reading. A floorboard creaked behind him. Ethan's heart slammed as he snapped the folder shut and shoved it back into the drawer. He turned just as Claire's voice whispered his name. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her face pale in the dim light. "I couldn't sleep," he said too quickly, the lie bitter on his tongue. He stepped past her before she could press further, the image of Melissa still burning in his mind. Claire reached for his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan, please, whatever you're chasing, it's not worth it. Don't let this house take you under the way it did Dad." He looked at her, the words caught between them. He wanted to tell her the truth, to confess the weight pressing against his ribs. But Richard's warning echoed again, sharp as glass. Trust no one. Ethan pulled away. Outside, the night was thick and restless. He walked the length of the yard, staring at the neighboring house where Sarah's light still burned. She had always been a presence of comfort, but now her warnings haunted him. And Melissa, her silence, her guarded glances, suddenly meant more than he had realized. When he returned to his room, he sat on the edge of the bed, fists clenched. The photograph lingered in his memory, an image he could not erase. His father's life, his lies, were tied to Melissa's family in ways Ethan could no longer ignore. He leaned forward, his voice a whisper meant only for the dark. "I have to know the truth." The storm was building, and he was already caught inside it. If you want to know how deep these lies run, stay with this story. Follow each step, share this journey, and don't look away. The secrets waiting ahead are darker than you can imagine. The rain came down steady, turning the streets into slick ribbons of light and shadow. Ethan walked with his collar pulled high, his thoughts circling endlessly around the photograph and the coded notes hidden in Richard's desk. Each step felt heavier, as though the ground itself wanted to drag him under. The city had a way of swallowing secrets, but tonight it seemed determined to spit them back into his hands. Daniel found him outside the corner store, his figure half hidden beneath the glow of a street lamp. "You've been avoiding me," Daniel said flatly, his voice clipped. His eyes, dark and restless, carried both worry and resentment. Ethan met his gaze, the silence stretching between them like a blade. "I'm not avoiding you, I just don't." Daniel cut him off, stepping closer. The rain dripped from his hair, running down his face like sweat. "You're hiding something. I can see it. And I swear if you drag me into it, if you drag Claire into it, I won't forgive you." Ethan clenched his jaw. The accusation stung, not because it was wrong, but because Daniel wasn't entirely mistaken. "I'm not dragging anyone anywhere," he said through gritted teeth. Daniel shook his head, frustration rippling off him. "I've known you too long. You're lying to yourself, Ethan. And whatever you've found, it's going to burn everything down." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked into the rain, leaving Ethan standing there with anger and guilt coiling inside his chest. By the time Ethan returned home, the night felt colder. Melissa was waiting on the porch, her face pale, her coat clutched tight against her body. Her eyes searched his, and for the first time, he saw fear there. Not of him, but of what she carried inside. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly, glancing toward the dark windows of the house. "Claire will—" "I needed to see you," Melissa interrupted, her voice trembling. She stepped closer, her hand brushing rain from her cheek. "There's something you need to know." He led her inside, the silence between them louder than the rain. They sat in the dim glow of the living room, the air thick with things neither of them had spoken aloud. Melissa kept her hands clasped tightly, as though she were afraid they might betray her. "My father worked with Richard," she said finally, her voice breaking the stillness. "Years ago, before everything." Ethan's chest tightened. "What kind of work?" She shook her head, her eyes flickering toward the floor. "I don't know everything. They kept it quiet, but there were debts, promises made and broken. After a while, my father stopped coming home. He was always with Richard, and then one day it was over. He never spoke of it again, but the look in his eyes—" She swallowed hard. It was like something had died inside him. Ethan leaned forward, searching her face. "And your family?" Her lips trembled, but she forced herself to continue. "We lost everything. My mother never forgave him. She said Richard had ruined us. And then we left." The pieces clicked together in Ethan's mind like shards of broken glass. Richard's warnings, the photograph, Melissa's pain, they were threads of the same knot. And now, with every word Melissa spoke, the knot pulled tighter. A sound outside broke the moment. Footsteps, faint but deliberate. Ethan's body tensed. He rose quickly, pulling Melissa with him. They moved to the window, peering into the rain-washed dark. A figure stood across the street, unmoving, watching. The shadows obscured the face, but the intent was unmistakable. Melissa clutched his arm. "They're following you," she whispered. His heart pounded, rage and fear colliding in his chest. Whoever it was slipped back into the night, leaving only the echo of their presence. Ethan turned to Melissa, his voice low but fierce. "Why now? Why are they watching me?" Melissa shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "Because you're closer than anyone's ever been, and they won't let you find out the truth." The room seemed to close in around them. Ethan's mind burned with questions, but he forced them down, focusing on the weight of her trembling hand in his. The storm outside raged, but the one inside him was worse. He was already too far in. When Claire appeared in the doorway, her face pale with confusion, Ethan knew there was no turning back. Lies had wrapped themselves around this family for too long, and now they were tightening, ready to strangle. And Ethan, for all his fear, was determined to break them apart, no matter what it cost. The gun clicked in the silence, and Ethan knew someone close had turned against him. He froze, breath caught in his throat, the weight of betrayal pressing heavier than the barrel aimed at his back. The rain had stopped, leaving the night thick with the smell of wet earth, every sound magnified. Slowly he turned. Sarah stood there, her hands steady, her face pale but resolute. The woman who had once been a gentle presence in his life, a neighbor who had treated him like family, now looked at him as if she were staring through a stranger. Sarah, Ethan whispered, disbelief clawing at his chest. Why? Her jaw tightened. Because you don't understand what you're doing. You're tearing open wounds that never healed. You think you're chasing truth, but all you're going to find is ruin. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. You've been following me, watching me. I had to, she snapped. The tremor in her voice betrayed the steel in her stance. Richard asked me to. Before he died, he begged me to keep an eye on you, to make sure you didn't drown in his mistakes. Anger surged through him, hot and unrelenting. You've been lying to me, to Claire, pretending to care while you spied on us. Her eyes flickered with pain, but she didn't lower the gun. I did care. That's why I did it. If you keep digging, Ethan, you'll destroy yourself and everyone around you. Your father knew that. The words cut deep, but they only fed the fire burning inside him. He stepped forward, ignoring the weapon pointed at his chest. My father lied to me my whole life. He left me warnings but no answers. And you, his voice broke with fury, you helped him keep those lies alive. Claire appeared then, drawn by the shouting. She stopped dead in the doorway, her face going pale as she saw Sarah with the gun. What are you doing? Claire's voice shook, her eyes wide with betrayal. Sarah's gaze softened as she looked at Claire. I was trying to protect you. Both of you. Claire shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, you were supposed to be family. You were supposed to be the one person we could trust. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah's hand trembled at last, the gun wavering. With a strangled sob, she lowered it, the sound of the safety clicking louder than thunder. She turned away, covering her face with her hands. Ethan stepped forward, snatching the gun from her grasp. His voice was cold now, stripped of every trace of warmth. If you ever come near us again, I won't hesitate. Sarah's shoulders shook, but she said nothing. She slipped past Claire and disappeared into the night, leaving behind the echo of shattered trust. The living room seemed smaller, darker. Claire stood rooted to the floor, her tears catching the dim light. All this time, she whispered. She was lying to us. I believed in her. I trusted her. Ethan reached for her, but she flinched, as if his touch might burn. Ethan, she said brokenly, this isn't just about Dad anymore. It's pulling everyone apart. And I don't know how much more we can take. And her words struck deeper than any weapon. He wanted to tell her he could stop, that he could walk away from the storm swallowing them whole. But the truth was a chain around his throat. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything he had uncovered. That night, Ethan sat alone in the dark, the gun resting on the table before him. The shadows stretched long across the walls, whispering of betrayal and loss. Sarah's face haunted him, not just the gun in her hand, but the pain in her eyes, the conviction in her voice. She truly believed she had been protecting them. But protection, built on lies, was nothing more than another cage. His reflection in the window looked back at him, gaunt and restless, a stranger made of grief and anger. He pressed his palms against the glass, the night pressing back like a mirror of his own turmoil. The path ahead was darker than ever, yet his resolve hardened. He would not stop. He would not turn back. Every lie torn open brought him closer to the truth his father had buried, closer to the justice his family deserved. And for those listening, don't look away now. Things are only beginning to unravel, and what waits ahead is more dangerous than either of us can bear alone. Stay with me. Follow this story, because the worst is yet to come. The night pressed down heavy, silence wrapping the house like a shroud. Ethan couldn't sleep. The betrayal still burned in his chest, Sarah's trembling voice echoing in his mind. He sat at the kitchen table, the gun cold beneath his hand, when a draft carried the faintest scent of smoke. His eyes snapped up. Claire's room was dark, but from the hallway came a flicker of orange. He hurried down the corridor, heart thundering, and found her in the living room. The fireplace roared, flames gnawing at the edges of paper that curled and blackened under the heat. Claire! Ethan lunged forward, but she turned sharply, her face streaked with tears, her arms rigid as she clutched the last of the pages. I can't, she whispered, her voice ragged. I can't live like this anymore. These letters, these secrets, they're destroying us. They've already taken Sarah. Next, it'll be me. I won't let them swallow me too. He froze, the fire crackling between them. His father's handwriting, gone in an instant, erased by flame. Rage and grief collided inside him. Do you even understand what you've done? Those were the only pieces left, Claire. The only way to finish this. Her sobs broke free as she hurled the final page into the fire. Sparks burst upward like dying stars. You're blind, Ethan. You think this is about answers, but it's about chains. Dad's lies have wrapped around us so tight we can't even breathe. I'd rather burn it all than let it bury me alive. He wanted to hate her in that moment, but the sight of her trembling, broken and desperate, cut deeper than anger. She wasn't his enemy. She was his sister, clinging to survival while he clung to obsession. Claire, his voice cracked. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, retreating into the shadows, the firelight painting her face in fractured gold. The flames died slowly, leaving behind a pile of ash where truth had once lived. Ethan stood over it, fists clenched, the bitter stench of smoke searing his lungs. He crouched, sifting through the remains, searching for anything unburned, but the pages had turned to nothing. Every word, every clue, erased. Behind him, Claire's voice was barely a whisper. Maybe now we can be free. He turned to her, eyes burning not just from smoke, but from fury. Free? You think fire can free us? You think destroying his words makes the past disappear? His voice rose, sharp and raw. The past doesn't vanish, Claire. It waits. It festers. And now we've lost the only map we had to survive it. Her gaze wavered, but she didn't answer. She retreated to her room, the door closing softly, a barrier more final than any lock. Ethan stayed there, kneeling in the ashes, until dawn bled pale across the windows. His hands were smeared with soot, his heart scarred with loss. The house was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence of something broken. He carried the remnants outside, scattering them in the cold wind. Ash spiraled upward, drifting into the gray morning sky, disappearing like whispers swallowed by time. For the first time, he felt truly alone. But solitude brought clarity. If the letters were gone, he would find another way. His father had buried the truth deep, but not deep enough. There had to be more, hidden somewhere waiting to be unearthed. Sarah's betrayal, Claire's desperation, even the ashes at his feet, none of it would stop him. He clenched his jaw, lifting his eyes to the horizon. The answers hadn't burned with those pages. They lived in memory, in places untouched, in secrets still waiting to be unearthed. The fire hadn't ended his search. It had only sharpened it. And for those still listening, don't turn away. The flames may have consumed the past, but they've also lit a path forward. What comes next will test everything: faith, loyalty, even love. Stay with me, because this story isn't ending. It's just beginning to burn. The days after the fire stretched long and heavy, each hour steeped in a silence that clung to the house like damp fog. Ethan and Claire moved around one another like ghosts, sharing the same rooms but never the same breath. Their conversations, once sharp with anger, had dwindled into wordless glances, each one a reminder of what had been lost in the flames. Ethan's nights grew restless. He would sit awake until dawn, tracing invisible lines across old photographs, searching for clues his father might have left behind. Every crack in the wall, every drawer, every forgotten box in the attic became a potential hiding place. Yet no matter how deep he searched, he found nothing but dust and memories. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Ethan sat in the living room with the gun beside him again. The fire had reduced the letters to ash, but the rage in his chest had only grown hotter. He could still see Sarah's pale face when she told him the truth, still hear Claire's voice as she threw the past into the fire. He wondered if either of them understood how close he was to breaking. Claire emerged from her room, barefoot, her hair tangled from days of neglect. She lingered in the doorway, her eyes hollow but defiant. "You're still looking for ghosts," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. Ethan didn't answer. He only lifted his eyes to meet hers, the silence between them sharper than any blade. She crossed the room slowly, her steps hesitant, and lowered herself onto the sofa opposite him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the space, a steady rhythm against the glass, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Finally, Claire whispered, "I'm scared of you, Ethan." The words pierced him more deeply than he expected. He swallowed hard, struggling to steady his voice. "I'm not your enemy. You don't see yourself," she said, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You think you're fighting for truth, but every day you sink deeper into the same darknesses that destroyed him. You carry that gun like it's part of you. It terrifies me." He looked at the weapon, fingers tightening around it as if her words might snatch it away. "This isn't darkness," he muttered. "This is survival. Dad left something behind and I'll find it. I can't let his lies define us." Claire leaned forward, her hands trembling in her lap. "What if the only thing left is the lie itself? What if there's nothing to find? Will you keep digging until you bury yourself too?" Her voice cracked, and the vulnerability in it shook him. He wanted to argue, to shout, to remind her that everything they had lost demanded answers. But instead, he found himself staring at her with a grief he couldn't name. For a fleeting second, he remembered them as children, whispering secrets under blankets, believing the world outside their door could never touch them. That bond still existed somewhere beneath the ruin. But the fire had changed everything. The storm raged on, rattling the windows, as though the house itself wanted to split apart. Ethan set the gun on the table, the sound sharp in the stillness. He leaned back, pressing a hand to his face, exhaustion heavy in every breath. "I don't know who I am without this," he admitted, his voice raw. "Without the search, without the fight. If I stop now, then what was it all for?" Claire's tears slipped free, trailing down her cheeks. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against the back of his hand. "It was for us," she whispered. "Not for him, not for the truth, for us. Don't let his shadow decide who we become." The touch startled him, fragile yet grounding. He didn't pull away. For the first time in weeks, he allowed the silence to soften instead of harden. Outside, the rain began to ease, the storm loosening its grip. In the hush that followed, Ethan realized that maybe survival wasn't about chasing answers in the ashes. Maybe it was about choosing who to stand beside when the fire burned everything else away. But still, deep within, a spark of defiance smoldered. The past wasn't finished with him yet. The house held its breath as if it feared waking the ghost that clung to its charred bones. Ethan wandered from room to room, restless, his mind an endless loop of questions without answers. The gun was always within reach, the cold weight of it both a comfort and a curse. He could feel himself slipping further from the man he once was, yet he had no anchor strong enough to pull him back. Claire tried to keep her distance, but her eyes followed him everywhere. At night, she listened to his footsteps pacing the floor above her, each step a reminder of the storm still raging inside him. She wanted to reach him, but the gulf between them widened with every unspoken word. One evening, Ethan stumbled across a box buried in the attic's shadows. It was nothing more than cracked wood and rusted nails, but the sight of it made his pulse quicken. Kneeling, he pried it open, expecting letters, confessions, some thread of truth to hold on to. Instead, he found only fragments: an old watch that no longer ticked, a photograph blurred by water damage, receipts faded to near illegibility. Still, his hands trembled as he sifted through them, convinced the meaning was there, hidden beneath layers of ordinary things. Claire found him hours later, crouched in the dust, his face pale, his eyes wild. "You can't keep doing this," she said softly, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter him completely. He looked up at her, his expression hollow. "It has to mean something. He wouldn't have kept it if it didn't." "Or maybe it means nothing at all," she replied, her voice shaking. "Maybe you're giving him more power every time you try to piece together the scraps he left behind." Ethan clutched the photograph, his knuckles white. If it means nothing, then what was all this suffering for? What was the fire for? What was he for? Claire's silence was heavier than words. She crossed the attic and sat beside him, her body close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't move away. Downstairs, the house creaked under the weight of wind, the night pressing against its fragile walls. The world outside was asleep, but inside the tension pulsed like a heartbeat. Ethan stared at the photograph again, the blurred faces looking back at him like strangers. He felt the weight of his father's shadow pressing down, mothering every attempt at clarity. "Sometimes," Claire whispered, "the only way to win is to let go." The words landed like a blade. He wanted to reject them, to spit them out as weakness, but instead he found himself staring into her tear-streaked face. There was no judgment there, only sorrow, only the desperate hope that he might still choose life over obsession. For the first time, Ethan felt the fight draining from him. He placed the photograph back in the box, his hand trembling as if he were letting go of something heavier than stone. The attic grew unbearably quiet, the silence thick with all the things neither of them could say. Ethan leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. He was so tired, tired of chasing smoke, tired of carrying the weight of a man who had already burned everything to ash. Claire reached for his hand again. This time, he didn't hesitate. Outside, the wind began to ease, and the night, though dark, no longer felt like it was closing in. For the first time in what felt like years, Ethan allowed himself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, survival wasn't about unraveling every secret, but about finding the strength to keep breathing beside the one person who hadn't yet given up on him. Yet even as the thought flickered, fragile as flame, he knew the past would not loosen its grip so easily. The night still held its secrets, and the edge of despair was never far. But for that single moment, with Claire's hand in his, the darkness felt less absolute. The dawn crept slowly across the broken horizon, pale light spilling through the cracks of the house that had become both prison and refuge. Ethan stood by the window, his breath fogging the glass, his eyes tracing the faint outlines of a world that seemed almost foreign after so many nights of darkness. The silence pressed in, heavy yet strangely fragile, as if one wrong word might shatter it forever. Behind him, Claire stirred. Her voice was low, almost hesitant when she spoke. "You didn't sleep." "I couldn't," he admitted. His tone was flat, but beneath it trembled something raw, something almost childlike. "Every time I closed my eyes, it was him. The fire, the screams, the way it all collapsed." She rose and crossed the room, her hand brushing his arm. "That's not living, Ethan. That's just reliving. Over and over until it kills you." He turned to her, his gaze fierce but hollowed by exhaustion. "If I let it go, then what do I have left? Who am I without the anger? Without the fight?" Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You're someone who still has a chance. With me. With us." The words cut deeper than she knew. For so long, Ethan had carried his pain like armor, believing it was all that tethered him to the world. Letting go felt like surrender, but clinging to it meant drowning. He could feel himself standing on the last threshold, with only a step between destruction and the possibility of something else. He walked to the table where the box from the attic lay open. The photograph still rested on top, blurred faces staring out as if mocking his desperation. He lifted it, studied it one final time, and then, with a slow exhale, he set it aside. The gesture was small, yet it shook through him like an earthquake. Claire's hand slid into his, steady, warm, unyielding. "You don't have to carry him anymore," she whispered. "He's gone, but you're still here." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of those words. He was still here, scarred, fractured, haunted, but alive. He could almost hear the sound of his own heart fighting to keep going, a rhythm that had outlasted the flames and the silence. They stepped outside together as the sun finally broke through the clouds. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of ash and damp earth, but beneath it lingered something cleaner, fresher, as if the world itself had taken a breath. Ethan closed his eyes against the light, feeling it warm his skin, and for the briefest moment, the shadows loosened their grip. The past would never truly vanish. He knew that. There would be nights when the fire returned in dreams, when the echoes of his father's voice clawed through the dark. But here, in the fragile glow of morning, with Claire's hand clasped firmly in his, he felt the possibility of choosing differently, of refusing to be defined only by what had burned. The road ahead was uncertain, marked with scars and silence, but for the first time it was a road he could imagine walking. Not alone, not as a prisoner of memory, but as someone who had survived the fire and who might yet find a way to live beyond it. And so, standing at the edge of a new day, Ethan did the hardest thing he had ever done. He let the silence be just silence. No longer a void, no longer a chain, simply the space in which life could begin again.